the way that they're dealing with this particular issue. He said that for many years they've been going to Parliament as the Ingonyama Trust board, and yet they were treated with respect, and something has changed. He even said that, look, you know, people have, they want us to vote for them, but they don't really like us. And he suggested that, you know, we need to decide whether we continue to tolerate this. So the land issue in South Africa, of course, a big issue which continues to be debated. At the moment, we have a parliamentary inquiry that's taking place, hearings that are taking place around the country. But Kirshni, you're with us as well. It's been quite an anticipated day in terms of what the King might say around this issue, land, but particularly the Ingonyama Trust.
Yes, indeed, Peter, and it's been very interesting to see how the Zulu monarch's message has really resonated with his people this afternoon. Thousands have really come out to the Ulundi Stadium in northern KwaZulu-Natal to hear what their traditional leader has to say on a very emotive question in the country right now. Of course, coming into sharp focus this afternoon is the Ingonyama Trust, which owns about 30% of traditional land in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, and it's going to be interesting to see what's going to come of this issue as we continue to move forward with the public hearings on land expropriation without compensation. Live visuals out of Ulundi in northern KwaZulu-Natal this afternoon. Well, earlier on, we also heard from IFP leader, that's Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, adding to the overriding sentiment of the day, saying that land must continue to be owned and managed by the King of the amaZulu. But we do have our SABC News foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena, standing by with more on this story.
Well, I think what is critical is that finally the King was able to communicate or to consult with stakeholders, particularly in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, to share his thoughts about the current process to look at the issue of the land question that has been so important in this country. We know that in other countries we had serious problems, like in Zimbabwe, and the government currently, including the political parties in parliament, they have engaged in a process to try and find a lasting solution on the land question. But of course, you have different groupings with different thoughts and also different interests, and therefore it was going to be a very, very challenging one, this one, to resolve. And it's no surprise that the King is quite harsh and angry that perhaps that suggests that this process is going to remove what belongs to his people, and particularly the Ingonyama Trust that has been in the news recently. We know that the former president of the Republic, Ntate Kgalema Motlanthe, was tasked by Parliament to engage in a process to look at laws that needs to be repealed or changes in the law. But this issue of the land came out very strong during those consultations around the country, and it is for that reason he presented a report at a special meeting of the ANC where they were discussing the land question. It was a report. He was actually reporting back on what people were saying. Therefore, it's up to the ANC as the governing party perhaps to decide the content of the report, whether there is any possibility to implement all the recommendations or what came out of those hearings. Therefore, it is not a final report. It is not a position of government. It is not the position of the ANC. But Kgalema Motlanthe was given that responsibility to consult, and perhaps that's what he gathered from people, and therefore he presented that. It is for that reason the ANC is still participating in the hearings around the country that we see right now all over the province, the parliamentary process. Therefore, this whole issue of resolving the land question is not yet final.
All right. So it is quite a thing to navigate because there are different parties with different interests. So part of the report suggested that the Ingonyama Trust was raising money through leasing of land. I think 2016 they raised something like 96 million rand. The report is suggesting that people are not generally benefiting from this money that's being generated. So that's one issue that needs to be resolved. What kind of passions are being raised as a result of this? Because you get some people now saying we want the land for ourselves, we don't want to be paying rent.
Well, you know, when you talk about accountability, we can't be selective. As a country, if we want accountability, we cannot be selective. People must be accountable or must be held to account. Therefore, I think the question is what is contained in that document. It's up to government or the stakeholders to go back to those who are responsible for the Ingonyama Trust to ask these questions and find a solution. But you can't say certain people cannot account. All of us, we must account.
And again, the challenge is modernity, the constitution, plus traditional values, where the king's word was enough in terms of the law and rule of law. Now, fast forward to 2018, how do we balance these forces, I guess, is what government has to grapple with.
Yes, but when you listen to the king, he is not against the constitution. He is actually calling for sober minds to try and find a solution in terms of balancing all those interests, you know, what the constitution requires and the cultural values and the cultural norms and beliefs and how people used to live and them believing in a particular way of living, and that should be taken into consideration. I think we still have time to engage thoroughly on these issues as a country. It's not too late. I think leadership is required at this moment to ensure that this matter doesn't lead to serious divisions in the country. And therefore, at this moment, I respect perhaps the President of the Republic to issue a statement in terms of responding to the current process, parliamentary process, not to take position, but just to comment about the parliamentary process, but also to comment about what's being discussed currently, just to allay fears.
We're just going to go through to our reporter, Simpiwa, who's on the ground there, actually, who's been watching all of this unfold. Let's get a sense of what it was like there and some of the messaging that came through, particularly with some of the leaders just before the King spoke. Simpiwa, give us an update of what you heard and saw today.
Well, a very good afternoon, Peter. As you've just said, the King has just completed his speech, which took about 3 hours plus. Well, before he spoke, actually, Prince Buthelezi was actually introducing him when he made a plethora of statements, a number of statements regarding the issue of land in the province. I'm sure you are battling to hear me, but I will continue nonetheless, hoping that I am audible. But perhaps let me just touch on the issues that the King spoke about in his address today. He spoke really about the fact that the Zulu nation has got a history in terms of acquiring land in the province, saying that the Zulu nation fought hard to get the land that it's currently enjoying in this province, and also saying that he will do everything that he can in his powers to ensure that for as long as he's still alive, this land is not taken away from the Zulu people. He is basically saying that this is a direct attack on the Zulu nation. He's also made a very bold statement with regards to how the political parties in the country are campaigning on this issue of land, saying or rather urging Zulu people to actually be very careful and not be exploited by political parties, and yet when their votes are needed. Well, Peter, I'm actually very struggling to actually make statements here. As you can see, amaButho are still busy right behind me. They are singing. The king has just been given a cow by the group that was also invited in this event, the RET champions, they call themselves. They've just given him a cow. So amaButho are now busy singing as the proceedings are about to be finished.
All right, that's Simpiwe Makanya, who's live at the Ulundi Sports Complex, where the king has been speaking for a significant period of time and spreading a message of, we can't continue to tolerate what's going on, but at the same time warning people to be calm. He's saying that he's not inciting violence, but there was a lot of war talk from the speakers before that. So this is a very emotive issue and one that needs to be managed lest things get out of control.
It is for that reason I spoke about the decisive leadership, you know, to try and manage this situation. The land question, it's an emotive issue. I mean, we know very well that the struggle on the continent has always been about the land dispossession. We have these political parties, particularly the parties such as the ANC, the PAC, the African parties, because of the land question. We know that the ANC was formed in 1912 after religious leaders and cultural leaders or traditional leaders or kings and queens met, and they were complaining about land dispossession. That is why kings like Moshweshwe were there, you know, to even donate cows when the ANC was launched, because they believed in that cause of fighting for the land. You'd recall Sol Plaatje's utterances around the land question after the 1913 Land Act. So the fight has always been around the land dispossession, you know, and Africans losing the land that they used to have, you know, for them to have wealth and perhaps to have food. And therefore, it is always a very burning issue and a contested terrain when you come to dealing with land redistribution.
But the land in this instance is already in the hands of black people. So what is different about dealing with this issue? Is it who controls it, who manages it? Is that really at the heart of
this? Political parties and stakeholders or people who have interest in this topic have different views how to go about this land question. Some are saying, take the land, give it to the state, because then the state represents the people. Others are saying, give the land back directly to ordinary people. Therefore, you have to find a balance in terms of doing this. On the other hand, those who are owning hectares and hectares of land, some of them are refusing to give the land back. Go to Free State. I was born and brought up in the Free State. I live in the Free State. When you drive home, you see hectares and hectares of empty land, just, you know, the farm and all that, owned by one person. You go to the township Namahadi. It's a small town. People are crammed in a small township. And therefore, it is for that reason you cannot say it can be business as usual. You really have to find a solution to this issue. But you have to avoid a situation where people, you know, decide on their own without being led to resolve this matter. You are aware that in urban areas right now, there's a problem in terms of shelter and housing. If you don't manage this thing properly, it will lead to a serious conflict. You then have the rural areas where you previously had these homelands, where already the land was either under the traditional leaders or perhaps the people who were governing those homelands. Therefore, you have to find a way also to ensure that you distribute that land accordingly without perhaps making other people aggrieved. Now, when you come to KZN, this Ingonyama Trust was meant to be a port where you can put resource, but that resource must be distributed back to the community. But unfortunately, human beings are human beings. When they are given responsibility, they tend to abuse and fraud and corruption, and therefore some people are not happy. others are happy. Therefore, there has been questions raised around the Ingonyama Trust. I think government must appoint a group of experts to interact with stakeholders around this issue of Ingonyama Trust and find a lasting solution.
The Deputy President tried to reassure the traditional leaders soon after speaking in the National Council of Provinces that land reform wasn't going to threaten the traditional leaders. But the talk that was coming out of the King is he feels under threat. We can't have both right. Are traditional leaders under threat by some of the government proposals or reports suggesting things must change?
Government has got different mandate and roles to play. Traditional leadership is completely different. And sometimes the two cannot agree on a way forward in terms of addressing any challenge. But what is critical is for the stakeholders, both government and the traditional leadership and political parties, to come together and find a solution. There's no way out. It can't be a one-way street. It can't be only the traditional leadership that is going to decide on this issue, or government. Because at the end of the day, this must benefit the ordinary people. And therefore, the two must come together and discuss this issue and ensure that there's peace and stability in the country. And I still have confidence in the leadership of this country from different persuasions and different groupings that they can still find a solution. In the same way they were able to find a solution before the new dispensation. We know very well on the eve of elections, some parties were refusing to be part of the electoral process. But finally, an agreement was reached and they all participated, except very few parties who didn't really matter.
All right. Again, I keep coming back to the traditional setup because I get a sense when I watch these powerful images. An Imbizo is called, traditional leaders come, they give gifts to the king. And in our cultures, the king's word is powerful. And his statements saying the Zulu land is not going anywhere, the kingdom is not going anywhere. Can the lawmakers go against such strong traditions?
Well, the kingdom is not going anywhere. The kingdom is there. It will be there. I mean, it's the constitution, protects people, who believe in different persuasions. The problem is they have to sit down and resolve this land question. They have to resolve this land question. Both the political parties and the traditional leaders and other stakeholders, because it is not only the traditional leaders who are having reservations around this process currently. There are individuals as well, particularly the minority group, whether justified or not, but you have to engage and find a solution. And I think these hearings around the country speaks to that, consulting people, gathering views, finally come up with a solution that is going to benefit the country and particularly the ordinary people, not the leaders.
What do we make of the king when he said that we have people who don't really love us, but they want us to vote for them? What is he saying?
Well, he is basically saying it's well and good to support political parties, but do they have interest of the people at heart, or is it all about themselves? There's a portion where he said, why should we be led by thieves? So he's asking hard questions. Whatever is happening now, is it in the interest of ordinary people or South Africans? Or this is a process to enrich individuals? Because we saw what happened in Zimbabwe. The process was abused by other people. Therefore, as South Africa, we can't repeat the same mistakes. Therefore, he's asking good questions, but I think the solution lies in the fact that they must come together and resolve this issue.
This Imbizo being such a significant one in size and stature, is this a show of force to government to say, listen, you must take us seriously?
Yeah, it was a consultation, but it was show of force, of course, to say, be careful, be careful. And you heard the king when he made remarks earlier on saying that it is during the week, so many people here. It speaks to how you respect the king and how you are concerned about the land question. Therefore, it was a show of force.
Right. We're running out of time, but very briefly, is a precedent being set in the way that they deal with KwaZulu-Natal about the rest of the country? When you sit down, you resolve this issue, where you have traditional leaders. It can't be just for KZN. You have to do it with all the provinces. You have traditional leadership in Limpopo, in Free State, in Mpumalanga, in Northwest, in Eastern Cape, even the Western Cape, in the Northern Cape, you have the KZN there. So you have to find a lasting solution, and it shouldn't be exclusive to a particular grouping in South Africa. If you are saying, I'm going to address this issue of the land question so that it doesn't make the king unhappy, it should apply to all the traditional houses in the country. It shouldn't be just the king of amaZulu. You must do it with, Bapedi have their own traditional leadership. Basotho, we have our own leadership. I'm sure the Venda, the Tsonga, and many other groupings, they do have traditional leadership. Therefore, you must ensure that you are not selective when you address this issue. That is why I'm saying the government, the political parties, and all stakeholders must come together and find a lasting solution. Even the minority groups, they must play a part. We must find a lasting solution, because you cannot continue with the status quo. This thing is bound to explode if it is not properly handled. Sophie, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your insights. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Peter.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more for you on this segment, which is